And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my own grave and go home to my Lord and be free.
Hey, everybody, come on in, come on in, come on in. As the prophets say, as they say, I'm going to say it. Invite someone, share this with someone who is of like mind. Today, we are continuing our conversation from yesterday and lifting relevant questions in the Black Lives Matter movement and calling for direct action in addition to the litigation, in addition to the advocacy efforts that are going on to end the scourge of Black and brown bodies in our public square, the state of affairs that is policing in America. And if you believe that this is an offense to good police officers, this is not for you. Because this is not about good police officers. This is about a system of policing that is rotten to its core. And it is rotten because the political system which authorized it is rotten to its core. That political system is rotten to its core because our theo-ideology is rotten to its core in terms of race. There are lots of things that are beautiful about this country. There are lots of things that make it one of the best, brightest, and most consistent hopes for liberated people around the world. People wouldn't fight to get here. But even while we celebrate that which is good about this country and those who have fought to make it good, keep it good, preserve its goodness for future generations. For those of us who really love America, we cannot rest until she lives up to her highest ideals and values, not just for the privileged or the few, but for the many and for those who have often been locked out of those opportunities. And so the bountiful blessing of America is that we get to come on and share ideas with each other as citizens to discuss these ideas in the marketplace and to exchange and to buy, to sell. And all of this is appropriate. All of this is what it takes to live in a republic. Some might even argue a democracy. But these conversations are necessary. So share them, share them, share them, share them. In this space right now that we might come in and dialogue. I'm monitoring the comment section as well for questions and concerns. But let's begin in this broadcast with the discussion of what I believe is one of the real root causes as to why, according to Mapping Police Violence, which is a website that it's kept statistics as it relates to police involved shootings and violence for a number of years. Their data is publicly available. Their methodology is publicly available. They track not only police involved violence, but they compare violence between places, national trends. They have police scorecards, as well as a full list of their database, which is available for people to look at. In 2020, despite a pandemic, despite a national shutdown, where people were quarantined into their homes for 6 weeks in some places, 3 months in other places, and people still have not gotten back up to full engagement socially. There have only been 12 days in 2020 where the police did not kill someone. 12 days where police did not kill someone. And this is simply unacceptable. Simply unacceptable. Beginning on January 1st, there were 4 shootings. beginning on and continuing each day. 6 on January 2nd. January 3rd was a peaceful day. No one was shot or killed by the police. 2 on January the 4th. 6 on the 5th. 4 on the 6th, and on and on and on and on and on. And far too many of these people are black and brown, but make no mistake about it, far too many civilians are killed by the police every year. In comparison to other Western industrial countries, this does not happen. During the same period of this year, there were 11 police involved shootings in Germany. And that was a mark in Western Europe. Police have killed 781 people thus far in 2020. 781. And many have said, you're right. It's black, it's white, it's brown, but it is a disparity as well. Black people have been 28% of those who've been killed in 2020, despite only being 13% of the population. You can do the math. The disparity is twice as great as the percentage of the population, twice as great. That is why a Just Georgia coalition, diverse coalition of social, civil, and human rights organizations who've been working on the front lines of criminal justice reform, have called for a state of emergency. The NAACP has leaned in on that, along with other groups like the Southern Center for Human Rights, the Malcolm X Black Grassroots Movement, and other groups like Black Voters Matters has taken up this work as well. This state of emergency is particularly important in Southeast Georgia, where we have seen not only very high-profile deaths, either at the hands of citizens exercising police-like powers, like, for example, in the Ahmaud Arbery killings, where there was a former police officer who was using the subterfuge of the citizens' arrest laws to surveil, ultimately hunt down and kill Ahmaud Arbery. The world saw what happened on the videotape. For 72 days, the entire apparatus of the justice system worked to make Ahmaud Arbery guilty, to condemn his body as guilty, rather than to provide any scrutiny to the actions of the persons ultimately arrested by the GBI, charged by a fourth prosecutor in the case, and ultimately who's waiting trial before a Chatham County judge sitting in Brunswick, Georgia. We witnessed that case, but the southeast part of Georgia is not different from anywhere else in the country, be it a small place like Sylvania, Georgia, where you have the trooper Jacob Gordon Thompson, who shoots a 60-year-old senior citizen in the face, the predicate being a broken tail light. Small places like Sylvania, and at the same time in DeKalb County, you saw the death of Anthony Hill, shot by a police officer. Anthony Hill being a veteran who's suffering from the trauma of war that this country has been engaged in, is completely naked on a field, is shot and killed. His body was condemned because of its blackness, and even naked, he was a threat to someone. And so we want to talk a little bit about that, the theo ideology that is at the deepest parts of the roots of our problem. And that's tied directly to white supremacy and to our interpretation of the Bible. I should say misinterpretation of the Bible to serve the ends of white supremacy and the exploitation of Black bodies as well. And so that's what we want to talk about a bit today. And I'm monitoring the comment section. I thought it'd be helpful to talk a little bit about these things because no one else is going to do it. People often talk about the conversation. People often talk about the need for the conversation, but the conversation never happens. What happens is politicians and some stakeholders get together and talk long enough for the fervor of that moment, for the pain of that moment, uh, uh, for all of the tragedy of that moment to be moved quickly off of the front pages while it pops up in another place in America. The tension with the news media goes there and the conversation ceases. All of these people talking about a conversation, but it never happens. And so we have to drive these conversations to those who are willing to listen. And many people, the same ones who talk about the need for conversation and dialogue, are not interested in this conversation, especially when you begin to look earnestly at the role that Christianity has played in condemning the Black body, the role that it has played in shaping a system that can sanctify even the most horrific of acts, the enslavement of people, torture, murder, rape, and exploitation of all that is theirs, and the expectation that any children or heritage that came from that person would be subject to the same kind of thing, hereditary chattel slavery. Is there anything more horrific that has been dreamed in the imagination of mankind than that? And so that kind of conversation is not going to happen because it's not in the best interest of anyone to have that kind of conversation. But we must endeavor to do that. Let me, before we turn to a couple of questions about the Black body and the guilt of the Black body, do a couple of things. One, I want to let you know that if you have questions about Black bodies, Black Lives Matter movement, and the justice of God from a Christian lens, from an Afrocentric perspective within the Christian lens, then I would encourage you to pick up Kelly Brown Douglas's work on Stand Your Ground. It's an excellent piece. And I'm actually drawing some of what we will share from the second chapter entitled The Black Body and the Guilty Body, the Black Body, the Guilty Body. She does an excellent job of framing it. And so we want to talk about that. So that's a tool, a useful tool. You should order that today from your local bookstore if you can. If not, from one of the online dealers. And kind of lived experience that we are all going through right now and preaching in defense of Black lives, I'm not sure that the preaching can be all that relevant, considering what many in our community are going through. And so that's the first point. I want to make sure you have a good resource, and that's a part of our job to highlight and lift up resources that can help you in this conversation, these difficult conversations. The second point that I want to lift up is to push back against the false narrative that the Black Lives Matter movement is a terrorist organization. The same folks who say this say nothing about the Southern Poverty Law Center's reports that say that they are real terrorist organizations that operate within the United States on the far right, and that they are racialized in their violence. They say nothing about the history of domestic terrorist organizations like the KKK, or the infiltration of the KKK today within the ranks of the military as well as in the ranks of law enforcement. But we'll lift up the notion that Black Lives Matter movement is a terrorist organization. Today, 57 years ago, the KKK, the Christian Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, bombed the 16th Street Baptist Church, interrupting Sunday school and killing 4 precious souls. I've had the privilege of meeting the fifth person involved in that bombing, Sarah Collins Randolph, and she is still very much alive as a witness, no less than Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, of coming out of that fiery furnace that was the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church. And so they will call Black Lives Matter movement a terrorist organization. Black Lives Matter movement has never bombed a church. Black Lives Matter movement has never called for racialized violence, has never called for any of those things. If you want to know what Black Lives Matter movement is called for, then listen. It is called for an end to death of Black, brown, and often poor white bodies in the public square. It is called for real policy solutions that will make our communities safer. It is called for political courage from those who hold offices in our representative democracy. Some will argue with me and say this is Republican. They are arguing for real accountability from those who have kicked the can and pushed in kind of policies that exacerbated communities and brought us to the place where we are. And the movement for Black Lives is not a secret organization. You can go online and look it up. And there is a full slate of platform agenda items that can help. The 8 can't wait were all things to help to make our community safer. And so I want to push back against that notion that the Black Lives Matter movement is somehow some terrorist organization. I wouldn't be affiliated if it was a terrorist organization. But what it is a movement to tell the truth. And the truth is often an offense to those who wish to live in a lie. How can the truth be offensive unless you are content to live with a lie? And of course, we'll talk a little bit about some of those lies, because as soon as you start to tell the truth about America, those who have been soaked in some of the lies, including the Anglo-Saxon myth, American exceptionalism, and the guilt of Black bodies itself, will immediately begin to argue with you. If you don't love this country, leave it. Well, I do love it. And I have paid more than my fair share, and my ancestors have too, for the right to claim my space and to make this a better place for my children. If you want to leave, you leave. My people were drugged from their homelands where they wanted to stay. The folks who tell you to leave were thrown out of where they came from. And that's just the truth. And that will offend people, but that is the truth. And so I'm going to push back against that narrative to let you know there's active and ongoing litigation, to let you know that there's active and ongoing advocacy, lobbying at City Council, County Commission, at the General Assembly, at the National Congress, Senate, and the House. And these protests are designed to keep pressure. The riots and any looting that you see, some of it has been instigated by people not even associated with Black Lives Matter. Some of the rioters in Atlanta, I've led marches in Atlanta, 30,000, 40,000, 120,000, not a single broken window. I know what protesters in Atlanta look like. Some of the folks that I saw in Atlanta were not associated with any group I've ever seen. These were folks who were on skateboards, knocking out windows. These were folks who had their face covered. These were some folks who, from a phenotypical standpoint, were white, who were doing these things, and who had been previously associated with sort of radicalized leftist groups who are anarchists. For them, Black lives don't matter either, because their desire is to see a disruption of society. And I want to see that disruption as well. But I am deeply committed to the Kingian notion of nonviolence. But make no mistake about it, that often means because the folks we are opposed to reserve the right to always use violence. That doesn't mean that peace is the only tactic. And so sometimes disturbing the peace through civil disobedience, disturbing the peace through other tactical ways is necessary in order to dramatize the appalling conditions for which you're seeking to change. And uh, and rioting and looting is deplorable, and so is the conditions that lead to them, which is why Dr. King said that the riot is the voice of the unheard. And so the conditions that produce the climate that we're in are deplorable, and we've come to talk a little bit about those as well. So know that this is a part of an ongoing effort, and you have to press this movement where you are within your sphere of influence, and demand that if your lives matter, then it should track back to policies that reflect the same. Okay. Now, the last thing I want to say before I turn a little bit to hitting at some of the ideological basis for white supremacy and the complicity of Christianity in that, is that you not be confused or not become allured with the tactic of protest. It's not performative art. It's not the fashionable thing to do. It's not a place to take selfies and all of that. Protest is the reserved right of citizens, which is why it is protected by the First Amendment to the Constitution. It is the reserved right of citizens to redress their grievances directly to their government. And that's what protest is. It's sacred. It is as sacred of an act in a democracy as voting. Protest is as sacred in a democracy that has the history that this country has as running for office. It is a sacred act, no different from paying your taxes. It is the attempt of citizens to search for the common good. And when the status quo is no longer acceptable, they have a right to, they are expected to protest. For those who tell protesters they're being unpatriotic, they know nothing of the history of this country. They know nothing about the framework of this country. That everything that you have gotten and enjoy, you got it and enjoyed because somebody protested and demanded it. And then matched their protest in the street with heat in the courtroom or pressure on their legislators. And they did not yield, did not stop, despite ugly things that people say about them in the press, the denigration of their name and reputation, even threats to their life, even their lives themselves. They didn't stop until a change came. And if you expect to be loved during your lifetime, don't get involved in protest. It is my hope that any effort, if it's a real effort to make change, cannot be celebrated during my lifetime, because that involves the change of the status quo. And people hate that. They hate that. They hate that. And so they will hate you. But future generations will rise up and call you blessed. They will say, we are blessed because they lived. When I went to go name my sons, you can see them in the picture sitting on my desk. I could look at Thurgood Marshall. So that was my first son. Frederick Douglass and Langston Hughes. Witnesses from previous generations who did what they could with what they had. They had a law book in their hand. If they had an orator's podium within their reach, if they had the creativity of their mind, as Langston Hughes did, they used what they had in their hands. And if the Lord had blessed me with a girl, Harriet or Sojourner or Constance Baker Motley would have been a name worthy of one of our children, because it was worthy to bring about the liberation of our people. So this is not about being liked. This is about being free. And that old Negro spiritual before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave, is important to understand when it comes to protest. Because for some of us, it is performative art, a place to get your selfie, a place, a place to be seen. But for others, it is sacred. It is a commitment to seeing a course through to change, not just complaining, but doing the other work of registering people to vote, fighting to keep them on the rolls through the courts, registering people to vote, running for office and recruiting good candidates, registering people to vote, pushing for policy change in the various committees and before the various city councils and county commissions and general assemblies and before the Congress. It is about doing the work, studying the Constitution, studying the laws, to make real the promises of democracy. You have a role to play in it. It's not just complaining that other people do something, but committing yourself to doing it. And ultimately, the ultimate commitment, before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave. Give me liberty or give me death. That is the refrain of those. Now, everybody's a soldier until until the battle starts. Everybody's a soldier until it's time to die. But that, make no mistake about it, will be the work that some of us are called to. I don't want to die. I want to see my children grow up. I want to see their children and their children's children, perhaps. But I know that that's going to be the work for some of us. And not just those killed by police violence, but those who will put our bodies on the line to stop it. Okay? So if all you want out of this movement is a t-shirt and a hashtag and a selfie, then get out of the way. You're part of the problem. Get out of the way. In hushed whispers, you speak at your work. You're afraid of losing your job. I understand that's a pressure. There'll be people who lose their jobs just as there were before in the movement. There'll be people who are condemned. There'll be people who are called names. There'll be people who are killed. Any movement that we've ever seen in this country, whether it's the American Revolution, liberating this country from the oppression it saw under as a colony of Great Britain, involved violence. And people had to realize that, which is why the signers of the Declaration of Independence conclude that document with this phrase: our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. They knew that they were putting it all on the line. And for generations who come after, they'd be willing to do no less. They'd be willing to do no less. I want to just share that a little bit about Black Lives Matter. And then I want to call you to a direct action that will happen this Saturday, September the 19th. All roads will lead to Sylvania, Georgia, for the Justice Caravan for Julian Lewis, September the 19th. September the 19th. Folks will gather at 1 o'clock at City Hall in Sylvania, Georgia. Gathering at 1 o'clock at City Hall in Sylvania, Georgia. Make no mistake about it. I am clear about a couple of things. I told you earlier I met Sarah Collins, who is Addie Mae Collins' sister, one of the survivor, the fifth girl in the bombing, on a pilgrimage with John Lewis to Selma. And that on that pilgrimage, I couldn't help but get the sense that Selma was a town probably like Sylvania. The movement was happening in other places, bigger places. There was no notion that the movement was ever going to come to a place like Selma. And then Jimmy Lee Jackson was killed by Alabama state troopers. I can talk about this because I've taught this. I've studied this. This is American history. No less than the antecedents for the Civil War, no less than those that birthed the American Revolution. For indeed, Selma was a turning point. And Sylvania May can be one. But there, in response to the death of a black brother named Jimmy Lee Jackson, Selma became a focus point for registering people to vote. And John Lewis and Hosea Williams were there on Bloody Sunday to march in defense of the organizing effort in response to the death of Jimmy Lee Jackson, to register people to vote, to help them to get power, to change their own circumstances, not waiting on anyone to save them. They were determined to save themselves through the most American of acts, that right in the act of casting a ballot in your selection of what is in the common good. What could be more American? Now, trust me, they will call the same things that we're called: agitators, intruders, hate mongers, dividers, disturbers of the peace. They will call the same thing. And today we call them heroes. Some people do. And they were heroes. Amelia Boynton, hero. John Lewis, Hosea Williams, heroes. The nameless people who made sandwiches and stayed back at the church, heroes. Those who packed their bags and said, we're going to go to Montgomery and demand what was promised to us many, many years earlier, 15th Amendment to the Constitution, but should have been a given in a nation so conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal, but yet devised a system of government that gave the privilege of making decisions, politics, to white landowning men. The Justice Caravan for Julian Lewis, all roads lead to Sylvania. All roads lead to Sylvania this Saturday. And I believe that, like Selma, like so many other moments in American history, that from little places, little hamlets and villages, little towns and cities, that we will make real this democracy. And so 1 o'clock on Saturday, you hear more about that. The press conference is scheduled for tomorrow. Keep sharing this video, and let's keep talking about the black body, the guilty body. Julian Lewis was killed on August 7th, and almost immediately when the word came that someone had been killed on Stony Pond Road in Scriven County after a so-called chase by a Georgia State trooper, in this case, Jacob Gordon Thompson, there was an immediate set of questions that came forward. Was he armed? Reporter called me and asked me that. Was he armed? Can you confirm whether he was armed? Was he drinking? Was he drunk? Was he high on dope? I heard he had a record for drug use and possession. There was an immediate need to sanctify, to wash clean the actions of the trooper. The taking of life in this black body had to be sanctified. And in order to do that, there had to be a condemnation of Julian Lewis. An immediate condemnation of Julian Lewis. Kelly Brown Douglas raises this in Renisha McBride. Renisha McBride is shot in the face by a white man. She's shot in the face after she goes to his door to ask for help after being in an accident, and he shoots her in the face. And the need to sanctify his actions, which are not justified. A word that she had a blood alcohol level that made her legally intoxicated. And that was enough to kill him. And the absurdities as to what is enough to kill someone will prove the point. For Tamir Rice, being a child, doing the work of a child, playing in a park was enough. For Philando Castile, complying with an officer's command to retrieve your firearm license, but moving too quickly to do it was enough. For Breonna Taylor, sleeping in her own bed was enough. And today they issue out of the public treasury some money, which is a sad and pathetic uh, uh, substitute for real accountability, while her killers are free. They're paying millions of dollars in a form of a settlement today. Any excuse is good enough to sanctify the actions of the law. Any excuse. Because it is reasonable to interpret the actions of Black and brown people as criminal. Kelly Brown Douglas goes on and talks about Jordan Davis, who is the son of Lucy Macbeth, who is the sitting member of Congress from the 6th Congressional District. I have followed her before she entered in politics. I was the president of the Georgia NAACP at the time Jordan Davis was killed in Florida, and we supported her in that moment. Some of the millions of people who came to support her. Jordan Davis was in a car and listening to rap music, and he was shot in the back by someone who said that the music was threatening to them. And ultimately, even though he went through a trial and was found guilty of the attempted murder, he was a hung jury came back unable to convict him of the actual murder of Jordan Davis. In fact, from the beginning of the trial to the end of the trial, it was Jordan Davis who was on trial, because it is the Black body that is the guilty body. Mm-hmm. It is the Black body that is the guilty body. The killer, all he had to say was that Jordan Davis, he believed, had a gun. And that defense was enough to justify hanging the jury, because he felt like his life was in danger. When people, we've seen them over and over and over again, who actually present firearms to law enforcement officers, who have used them in extreme violence, are taken into custody without a scratch on them. Dylan Roof, who goes into Emmanuel AME Church, Mother Emmanuel, as it is called. I've been to that church. I knew the pastor, his wife. I know that community. My church has gone and had Bible study there. Such loving people. Dylan Roof comes in and sits in Bible study. That Christianity does not touch him, because it is not a Christianity that he is familiar with. It is not the Christianity that subconsciously leads Dylan Roof to radicalization, and that consciously leads him to take a firearm, an automatic weapon, into that place and commit the kind of destruction that he does in taking those lives. It's not the same Christianity. It's not. I had a white pastor, well-meaning Baptist, who said, "We are both Baptist preachers. Why can't we get this thing together? Why can't we have more dialogue? Why can't we exchange?" I said, the fact of the matter is, we are not reading the same thing. You know, when you read the Exodus story, and when I read the Exodus story, Pharaoh to you is you know, is about doctrine. Pharaoh to our people is about one thing, and that is the construct of power that we see before our very face. And there's a difference in seeing that quite frankly, the God of the slave cannot be the God of the slave master. And so long as you insist on your whiteness and the privileges associated with it, then we have to be Black. And that means that the divide that that construct produces is a chasm for which Christianity cannot close. But because of the way Christianity has been distorted actually makes that chasm even wider, even wider. From the natural law, which gives a theo-ideological platform for Anglo-Saxon exceptionalism and attempts to root the scriptures in 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 17th century Great Britain as the standard by which the canon is recognized. An attempt to whitewash all the figures of the scripture, scrub them of their historical, geographical, political, sociological place in the world. The Norman Rockwell esque notion of the scene at Bethlehem is no greater example. That is a scene of utter oppression and a government grinding people into the ground. And God determined to show his care for the marginal, the oppressed, the left behind of this world, shows up in Bethlehem on purpose. We see that story so differently. And so the notion of Anglo-Saxon exceptionalism is at the heart of this. And if people don't want to be truthful about it, that's their problem, not mine. That exceptionalism is found over and over again. And I pulled this piece out and I wanted to share it with you so that you would see it. It's reflected in natural law. This is how God has made it. Alexander Stephens, Vice President of the Confederacy, one of his descendants, Lawton Stephens, I had the privilege of working with when I was a law student in Athens. He's a fine man. As a matter of fact, we're working on a committee to promote greater inclusion in the law. But Alexander Stephens said this in 1861, the cornerstone address it is known as. He says the cornerstone of the Confederacy rests upon this, that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery, subordination to the supreme race, is his natural and moral condition. That's it. He went on to say that the Negro by nature and by the curse against Canaan is fitted for the condition which he occupies in our system. It is best not only for the superior, but for the inferior race that it should be so. It is indeed in conformity with the Creator. It is the natural law of God, Alexander Stephens says. And this is the cornerstone of the Confederacy. Okay. He goes on to say in that same cornerstone address, it is not for us to inquire into the wisdom of his ordinances or to question them. For his own purposes, he made one race to differ from the another, and he has made one star to differ from another in its glory. Now, who are we to judge God in this work? That's the writings of Alexander Stephens. That's the work of Alexander Stephens. It is in direct contradiction to the scripture itself. Peter, being full of the Holy Ghost, after Pentecost had come, began to speak, and the first utterance of a person filled with the Holy Spirit was to announce in Acts chapter 10, verse 34, that God is no respecter of persons. Put in the New International Version language, I now realize that it is true that God does not show favoritism. This is someone whose theo-ideology was fixed, that they were a special people, unique amongst all people as God's chosen people. Not Jewish people or Hebrew people, more accurately. But now God, the truth is, as Peter expressed it, I now realize how true it is that God is no respecter of persons. That's what Peter says in Acts chapter 10, verse 34 is a part of that vision. And what powerful words. I don't think there's any other powerful word that you can begin in sort of discussing this theo ideology of white Anglo-Saxon exceptionalism to contradict it than Peter, one who's rooted in his own Hebrew theo ideological exceptionalism. In verse 35, but accepts from every nation the one who fears him and does what is right. That's what Peter says. And so to get to that revelation, he had to set aside everything he had ever knew about himself and about his people. So as long as you insist on being white, I have to be black. If you will lay down your whiteness, your exceptionalism, I will lay down my blackness. I won't need it. And then those who urge that all we have to do is love each other can truly have a space to do it. No, all they want to do is love as so long as they remain on top, privileged to get the job and the promotion and to keep the job when everybody else is being laid off, to get better rates in financing, to have the favor of politics, who gets what, when, where, and how. Peter says it best, God is no respecter of persons. It's a direct contradiction to this natural law, this theo ideology that is expressed by Alexander Stevens in the Cornerstone Address. He says this is how the natural law has been perverted. Those who in the North, as he said, want to pervert God's law by placing the Negro as equal to the white man are those who want to upset the moral condition from which God himself has ordained people. This legitimation of white supremacy as the will of God is still at work. Few people will say it in the way that Alexander Stevens says it, but it is said in deed, if not in word. Okay. And that is it. When you do that, when you link up identity and a notion that it is God's will for you to reserve for yourself something that you will deny to others, you can justify almost anything after that. You can justify the commodified body. You can justify the crucified body. You can justify the convicted body. One of the most prominent things in a courtroom is the oath taking. You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. And within that framework, judgment is passed, certainly a much more sanctified process than the hanging tree or the whipping post, but no different. No different. I said I would only be on for about an hour today, and I want to put a pin there. Hopefully we've raised some issues that will cause further questioning of this. I'm going to go to some questions as we have them, And so many people are watching, and I appreciate that. Statement by Noel, who says, God bless you, Pastor. Thank you for fighting for us. Michael Williams said, will there be any other Black Lives Matter protests in Statesboro anytime soon? Get to organizing them. Get to organizing them. I am less concerned with mobilization as I am concerned with organization. Those are two separate things. We need mobilization to bring awareness, but we need organization to bring long-term change. What you get after mobilization is an opportunity for picture taking, some release of the pressure, if you will, some dramatization of the condition, but it is only organization that can bring about lasting change through policy reforms, can bring about lasting change through electing new regimes, new administrations, sitting new judges upon the benches, electing new prosecutors who can help to bend the arc of justice. Trotsky Stewart says Christianity is white supremacy's biggest tool. Christianity is white supremacy's biggest tool. I would say that Christianity has a great deal of complicity with white supremacy. It does. But I want you to know that, and I love the way that you use tool. For you to get from Acts 10:34, God is no respecter of persons, as the theological foundation for which Peter says that this new thing, Christianity, is going to move and have its being to the notion, the divine right of kings in terms of Europe, that the church itself will begin to bless some as having divine blood and thereby having the divine right to rule over others who are inferior and subjects to that those who have divine right to rule. That is a cousin to the sort of white supremacy model that we see in the United States, which cannot be based on blood, because this is the refuse of Great Britain. These are those who were colonists and viewed as less than, not even subjects to, but colonists to Great Britain. So blood is not the determining factor, although those who got their land from the king, even when there was no more king for them to be subject to, still kept the land. They didn't say that system was false and any rights, privileges we got under it, we put them into the public trust to issue out to everyone. No, they kept everything that they got from the system they sought to overthrow. Isn't that something? And in turn, they adopt a model after the Civil War that suggests that whiteness itself would be the privilege. And so people who were never considered white, people who were not Anglo-Saxons, begin to make their way into whiteness and into that privileged rank. You know, people who as far as 1968, with the passage, the adoption of the Voting Rights Act, could have never considered themselves white. Jews could have never considered themselves white. The Polish, the Italians, I can go on and on and on. People who could have never considered themselves white, because to be white meant to be Anglo-Saxon. And then after that, 1968, you see people moving into that rank. And every now and again, you start to see the tethering of this made-up construct of whiteness and the exceptionalism that's attached to it and that's sanctified by Christianity. In Charlottesville, for example, you see so-called real white folks saying Jews will not replace us. and Jewish Americans are saying, thought we were white. Thought we were white. Not. So supercilious is these racial classifications that has not been two censuses since 1790 that have contained the same list of race groups, so-called race groups. Couldn't even make it 10 years before we had to stretch the limits of what it meant. Change and twist and distort. And folks talk about this as if it is the truth, an eternal truth. And anyone of any sense of science knows that race has no biological or scientific meaning at all. None whatsoever. This construct has been forced upon people because of a theo ideology rooted in Christianity to determine politics, who gets what, when, where, and how in this country. And that's what it is. And I will gladly lay down my blackness, because I'm African anyway in origin, then to, but I can't do it so long as you maintain your whiteness, because my blackness is my resistance, which is why my blackness is the only thing necessary to make my body guilty. And if something happened to me tonight, I would have to prove, those who lifted up my cause, Justice for Francis Johnson, will have to prove me innocent, because I must have done something, anything, selling loose cigarettes, anything to justify my own death. I must be responsible for my own death, which is why George Zimmerman could hide in his whiteness, even though it was subject to debate as to whether he fit the classical definition of white, but he knew he could hide in the midst of it. He knew that he could walk into that courtroom and expect to walk out, because his fear, like the fears of others, are justified. It is as natural as a response to the black body, as a smile is in response to a baby's, to a mother's face, as to a baby and their response. It says natural. You're supposed to be afraid of the black body. You cannot trust the black body. Cannot trust the black male body. It is a inherently violent body. You cannot trust the black female body. It is an inherently sexually perverted body. And because it is such, then you have now the right to do whatever you want to do with it. You can rape it, take its babies. You can extort it, exploit it. You can kill it when you're done with it, because it is inferior. And God willed it to be so. You get from Acts 10:34 to Alexander Stevens' cornerstone speech of the Confederacy by telling lie after lie after lie to yourself. That's the only way you get there. And so the truth is that race itself is a lie. The truth is that white supremacy is heresy. The truth is that discrimination is a sin. It is wrong in the most basic understandings of ethics, religion or not. To reserve something, a right, a privilege, access, opportunity for yourself that you would deny to someone else because of their race, because of their gender, because of their sexual orientation, because of what nation they came from, their religious background. It's all bigotry. It's all bigotry. I see the need. Dr. Bryant says, may God bless you. Truly have a heart for people. Jill Morris is saying, teach. Others are saying that. Why would I leave a place my ancestors built? I'm not leaving. This land is your land. This land is my land. Matter of fact, we might ought to go check with the folks who occupied this space that we call our land now and see what they say about it. The peoples and the tribes and the nations who were wiped off the face of the earth. And those that weren't will run to pens that we generously called reservations. What happened to being innocent until proven guilty by a jury of your peers, whatever your peers are? That word jury of your peers is interesting, as it is drawn from the English common law and the notions of jurisprudence there, where there is a peerage. It's not supposed to be a peerage in the United States. You know, there are peers. These are people who are the ruling class, the lords in the English system, and everyone else who is not of their peers. And the notion that you should be judged by a jury of your peers means you're equals. Well, in America, all citizens are supposed to be equal. There's no excuse for anyone being labeled a criminal. Well, you tell that to Tamir Rice, who's 12 years old, and the radio traffic from the police officers talk about him as if he is a grown man. They see him as a grown man. He's 12, but they don't see him as a boy. He's playing with a toy. They see him as dangerous. So the toy in his hand becomes a weapon. No less than Amadou Diallo's wallet becomes a weapon. No less than my cell phone will become a weapon. No less. And that's why somebody says, well, why do you always wear a suit or a suit coat everywhere you go? Because I'm just trying to telegraph to everyone that I'm not dangerous. How can a man be dangerous in a sports coat? I try to drive an ordinary car. I try to not accessorize it. I try to say in every way possible, let me live. Let me live. So we're at the hour where we need to end. I'm going to come back on. If you want to join me in this study, you can get Stand Your Ground. It is Kelly Brown Douglas's work, Black Bodies and the Justice of God. And we'll come back on tomorrow and talk a little bit more on it and continue to dig in chapter 2. Stand Your Ground, the Black Body, a Guilty Body. I was waiting on all the folks who was talking about they're going to have these conversations. We need to have courageous conversations. I ain't seen one yet. I was waiting on folks, waiting on the folks who are all out saying, tell the protesters to go home. We need to have conversations. They ain't had a conversation yet. Ain't going to have one. Okay? And so we have to have these conversations amongst ourselves. Remember, Saturday, September 19th, there'll be the Justice for Julian Lewis Caravan. People coming from Atlanta, Savannah, Augusta, Macon, Albany, all points in between to lift up the call of justice for Julian Lewis, senior citizen who was shot in the head by a state trooper. And you know, one of my colleagues, I have a great deal of respect for, said that Trooper Thompson had an excellent character. I don't know his character. I can see his actions. And I do know that that regardless of any of that, we're talking about systems that operate, which means that you don't have to be a bad actor to get terrible, deadly, tragic outcomes if the system is bad. Good individuals operating in bad, corrupt, messed up systems will produce bad, corrupt, messed up outcomes. And that's what we're after, is system level change. System level change. Okay. I see Ressie Fuller. She's asked if this book is available in town. It should be available in the local bookstore, and I encourage you to get it from the local bookstore if you can. Let's keep our local bookstores and our local businesses in business. But certainly it's a book that you need to have in your library. Stand Your Ground, Black Bodies, and the Justice of God. Gotta go. Thank you all for joining. Share this broadcast with others who need to hear it, and join us again for dialogue, conversation in defense of Black lives. Take care.